The entire factory held its breath as the $6 million machine sat silent until a 14-year-old boy with mud-caked boots and a second-hand toolkit stepped forward. Engineers sneered, cameras rolled, and the CEO smirked, certain the boy would fail. But when the gears roared to life under his touch, every eye in the room widened in the stunned disbelief. Hi, everyone. Today we're telling a story that starts with laughter but ends in a way nobody expected. A $6 million machine, a factory on the brink of collapse, and a 14-year-old boy in worn boots, humiliated in front of an entire room. But what came next left even the most seasoned engineers speechless. This could happen to anyone, even you. One moment you're overlooked, ignored. The next, all eyes are on you to do the impossible. So before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Now let's begin. The air inside Vanguard Tech Systems had grown heavy. The hum of machines, once constant and comforting, had vanished. In its place, silence. And in a plant that relied on precision automation to hit production goals down to the minute, silence was terrifying. The $6 million automated line, the company's pride, the cornerstone of its quarterly revenue, had stopped cold 2 weeks ago. At first, no one panicked. Technical glitches happened, software updates got quirky, a few engineers stayed late, confident it was a quick fix. But by day 3, murmurs of concern had grown into full-on whispers of fear. By the end of week 1, teams of specialists had been flown in from Dallas, San Francisco, even Germany. Still, nothing. The machine wouldn't start, and worst of all, nobody could explain why. Now, as the second week neared its close, an emergency meeting had been called in the main control room. Department heads packed the long conference table under harsh fluorescent lights. Supervisors, engineers, and operations managers stood pressed along the walls, all trying to appear composed. But the strain showed in the furrowed brows, the tense fingers, tapping notepads the way people avoided eye contact. At the head of the table stood Victor Langston, CEO of Vanguard Tech. 52 years old, silver hair, always in place, tailored gray suit, untouched by a speck of dust. Victor's reputation was well-earned. He was ruthless, brilliant, and utterly intolerant of failure. He'd once shut down an entire plant in Nevada over a missed delivery deadline, and now he was watching this Ohio facility bleed millions in halted output. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. With each report, sensor errors, control board glitches, software inconsistencies, Victor simply nodded. And with each nod, tension deepened. Until finally, after the 6th engineer failed to offer a solution, Victor stood still for a moment. His cold gray eyes scanned the room. Then he pointed slowly, deliberately toward the supply closet just outside the glass wall of the control room. Maybe, he said, voice dripping with disdain, we should let the janitor's family take a crack at it. A beat of stunned silence. Then laughter. It started as nervous chuckles, but quickly spread. Managers, engineers, even a few interns near the back, all let out sharp laughs as if relieved to have something, anything to break the tension. But that's when everyone saw him. Leaning quietly against the wall outside the glass was a teenage boy, muddy work boots, a faded jacket too big in the shoulders, and wide eyes staring at the room full of adults laughing at him. Eli Carter, 14 years old, the nephew of Terrence Carter, the night janitor. Eli hadn't said a word. He was just waiting for his uncle's shift to end. But now he was the center of the joke. Inside the room, Victor tilted his head with a smirk. What do you say, kid? Want to show the big boys how it's done? A few engineers doubled over with laughter. One even pulled out his phone, raising it slightly to start recording, whispering to a colleague. This'll make a great meme later. Terrence, who had just emerged from around the corner, pushing a mop cart, froze in place. His eyes locked on his nephew. He started to move to speak to get Eli out of there. But Eli raised one hand gently without turning to look at his uncle. He stepped forward, slowly, eyes still wide but no longer afraid. I'd like to take a look, he said quietly. Silence. Victor blinked. What I'd like to take a look, Eli repeated. A stunned hush fell over the room. One of the engineers stifled a laugh. You serious, kid? You know how to run a Siemens 6000 interface? Eli didn't answer that. He just looked toward the big machine in the center of the floor, the one everyone had failed to fix, the one that had cost the company millions in 2 weeks of downtime. Victor gave a little laugh. Why not let the janitor's nephew play hero? The group parted. Phones lifted. Every eye watched as the muddy-booted teen walked slowly toward the silent behemoth of the production line. And not a single person, not even his uncle, knew what was about to happen next. Eli Carter walked toward the machine like someone who didn't know he was being watched. Not with fear, not with panic, just presence. The kind of quiet focus born not from arrogance, but from time spent alone tinkering in barns surrounded by tools most kids his age couldn't name. His boots thudded softly on the concrete tracking farm mud across a spotless factory floor. No one said anything. No one moved, except the phones. They stayed pointed at him, recording. He stopped in front of the central panel, the so-called brain of the entire packaging line. It was nearly 6 feet wide gray steel with blinking lights and a touchscreen monitor that hadn't shown a single useful readout in 10 days. Eli tilted his head slightly like he was listening. His fingers didn't move yet. He just looked. In the background, Victor leaned toward one of the managers. Let him poke around. He fries the board, will fire someone else for giving him access. Might be good press if he surprises us. If not, well, we needed a laugh. But there was something different in the air now. A subtle tension creeping back in heavier than before. A few of the senior engineers, ones who'd been in the game long enough to know when something strange was happening, began exchanging glances. Not everyone was laughing anymore. Eli reached down and unslung a small canvas tool roll from his backpack. It wasn't shiny or expensive, just a wrap of old cloth with hand-worn tools inside each one, used each one clean. A flathead screwdriver with a chipped handle, a pair of wire strippers blackened at the edges, a tester light that looked like it had seen 100 winters. Where'd he get that junk? One of the younger engineers whispered. But Eli wasn't listening. He was already removing the panel cover, exposing a maze of colored wires and control boards. He moved slowly, at first careful. Then his hands got faster, more confident. Inside his mind, old rhythms returned. Not of this factory, but of home. His dad's voice. Power doesn't lie to you, Eli. Wires don't pretend. Machines speak, son, you just gotta be quiet enough to hear them. Eli's fingers brushed over the wires. Red, blue, yellow, ground, voltage, sensor arrays. He blinked, recalling long nights under lantern light on the farm rebuilding broken hay balers with his father. Machines with rusted bolts and worn circuits. They taught you patience. They taught you to feel, not just fix. A few steps behind him, his uncle Terrence stood frozen, mop still in his hands, watching in silence. His chest rose and fell slowly. One of the supervisors leaned in to whisper to Clara Rhodes, a lead software engineer. If he shorts something, are we liable? Clara shrugged, eyes still fixed on the boy. Just watch. Eli paused at a cluster of wires near the sensor relay. A red and blue set connected to the input board. He frowned. Something felt off. He traced the wires backward, looked at the schematic taped inside the panel. Then he muttered, wrong direction. Nobody heard it but him. He reached into the tool roll and pulled out a stubby flathead, gently loosening the terminal screws. Slowly, carefully, he removed the 2 wires, switched them, and tightened the clamps again. He took a long breath, then closed the panel. Behind him, the crowd didn't breathe. Victor raised an eyebrow. That it, he called out. Should I get the parade ready? Eli turned to walk to the control monitor and press the reboot sequence. The screen lit up. Diagnostics ran. Loading bar. Then, stillness. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. Victor grinned. Nice try. We'll let you sweep up after the real engineers. A low hum pulsed through the floor. Lights on the machine flickered from red to green in sequence. Motors began to churn. Gears clicked into place. The conveyor belt rattled softly, then rolled forward with a smooth, synchronized glide. A technician at the far end gasped. It's live! Another shouted, We've got motion! The factory exploded. Cheers, gasps, stunned claps. People stared, mouths open. Even those still holding phones lowered them as if ashamed. Victor didn't move. His jaw clenched so tightly it looked like stone. Eli stood still, face calm, eyes watching the machine flow back to life like it had never stopped. Behind him, Clara stepped forward. "What did you fix?" she asked, voice soft. Eli turned. Polarity was reversed at the sensor. That's why the startup voltage kept tripping. Couldn't complete the sequence. One of the engineers, Ronald Greer, 25 years in electronics, blanched. "We checked that." Eli shrugged gently. "Sometimes you don't check the obvious." The room rippled again this time, not with celebration, but with realization. The boy had spotted what none of them did. Someone muttered, "No way he figured that out by chance." Eli nodded once, still not smiling. "I didn't. I learned from my father. He used to fix harvesters with less than half the tools you have here." Victor finally moved. "Your father's a farmer, right?" Eli's voice didn't waver. He was, before the industry forced him out. Victor blinked. "Gregory Carter." A hush fell again. Clara stepped closer. Gregory Carter was one of the most gifted design engineers on the East Coast. He did the fail-safe redundancies on the original Adams Line 400. A ripple of shock traveled the room. Whispers spread like fire. Victor looked pale for the first time. He left the field. Years ago. Eli nodded. He was forced out. After the injury. You know how it goes. The control room had changed. It was no longer a cage of power. Now it was full of eyes that saw something new in Eli Carter. Something Victor Langston hadn't planned for. Eli picked up his tool roll, packed it neatly, and walked back toward his uncle. Terrence looked at him with quiet pride. "Your father's going to want to hear this." Eli smiled just a little. "I think he already knows." The machine hummed like a heartbeat, steady and alive. One by one, people moved toward it, some cautiously, others as if drawn by something magnetic. Engineers who just minutes ago had rolled their eyes at the kid now hovered around the panel Eli had touched, peering inside as though it might teach them something they hadn't learned in 20 years. Eli, however, had already stepped back into the shadows, standing beside his uncle, with his tool roll tucked under one arm and mud still clinging to his boots. Victor Langston stood rigid, his face an unreadable mask. But inside, a storm raged. For a man who had ruled through ridicule and control, watching the narrative slip away from him, on camera, no less was infuriating. He scanned the room and saw it happening in real time. The engineers who once feared disappointing him were now nodding at each other with subtle respect. Clara Rhodes, usually tight-lipped during these meetings, glanced toward Eli and muttered, "That was elegant work." One of the junior managers clapped awkwardly, then another. Soon a wave of applause surged through the room, uneven at first but undeniable. It wasn't for Victor. It wasn't even for the now functional machine. It was for Eli, and it was infuriating. Victor raised a hand as if to restore order, but even that gesture didn't land the way it used to. He cleared his throat. "Let's not get carried away. The machine could have reset from previous updates. That boy just happened to be holding the screwdriver when it booted." Eli didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just turned and met Victor's gaze, steady, quiet, and somehow more powerful than any outburst. Clara crossed the room. "Mr. Langston," she said sharply, "I'd like Eli to debrief our systems team. He saw something we didn't. That matters." Victor's jaw tightened. "He's a child." "And you're the one who invited him," she replied flatly. "Let's not forget that." A few nearby employees chuckled nervously at first, then with genuine amusement. The tide had shifted. Everyone knew it. Victor might still be CEO, but in that moment he no longer held the room. Eli spoke up. "I don't need to join a team. I just wanted to help." But Clara turned to him, eyes sharp but kind. "Eli, I've been working in automation for 15 years. I've sat on panels at MIT. And I've never seen anyone diagnose and correct a polarity reversal under pressure like that, let alone a 14-year-old. If you're willing, I'd like to walk you through our schematics. Let's see what else you can teach us." Eli hesitated. He wasn't used to this being looked at with interest instead of suspicion. But then his uncle laid a hand on his shoulder. "You've earned this, son. Go show them what your dad taught you." For the next hour, Eli stood beside Clara and several engineers at the central console. They walked through error logs, startup diagnostics, and flowcharts. Eli didn't just follow, he contributed. He suggested a correction to the sequence delay that would shave off 15 seconds from each cycle. He asked why a specific sensor hadn't been isolated during diagnostics. He even offered a simple recalibration trick that his father used on grain sorters to optimize signal flow. At first, some of the engineers bristled, but slowly, as Eli explained, they began to nod. Then they started asking him questions. One veteran even pulled out a notepad. Victor watched from across the room, arms folded, his grip on control slipping with every passing minute. His eyes flicked to the corners where employees whispered. Some pointed, some typed into phones. The buzz was undeniable. Then the double doors to the control room opened. A tall man stepped in, sun-weathered skin, a slight limp in his right leg, worn jeans and a chambray shirt tucked loosely under a work vest. His hands were calloused, his frame solid but tired. His presence was calm, unshaken. Eli looked up. Dad. A hush fell again. Gregory Carter stepped fully into the room, nodding once toward his son, then scanning the crowd. His eyes landed on Victor Langston, and for the first time that day, it was Victor who looked away. Someone whispered, "Is that him, Gregory Carter, the one who designed the cross-phase backup on the Henderson system?" Clara moved forward, offering her hand. "Mr. Carter, it's an honor." Gregory shook it firmly. "I just came to pick up my son. I didn't expect this." Victor stepped forward, voice tight. "Gregory, long time. Didn't know you were still local." Gregory tilted his head. "Didn't know I needed permission to be?" Victor let out a strained laugh. "No offense meant. Just surprised, that's all." Gregory's eyes sharpened. "You were surprised the day I got injured too, right before the board decided I couldn't keep up with expectations. Remember that?" The room froze again. Gregory stepped past Victor and stood beside Eli. "My boy fixed your line, didn't he?" Clara answered. "Yes, he did. And he did it with a level of insight we haven't seen in this plant in a long time." Gregory looked at Eli. "You used the polarity trick." Eli smiled faintly. "The one with the reverse feedback loop." "Yeah." Gregory nodded, his voice thick. "That's my boy." Victor tried to regain control. "Well, thank you both for stopping by. You've had your moment. We'll take it from here." But now it was Clara who stepped forward. "With all due respect, Mr. Langston, this factory can't afford to keep pushing away brilliance. Gregory, would you consider coming back as a consultant? Part-time, flexible hours." Gasps rippled. Victor turned, eyebrows raised. "We already have senior advisors. None with his track record," Clara said, "and none who raised this kid." Eli's eyes widened. "Dad." Gregory looked at him, then at Clara, then back at the machine still running perfectly. "I'll think about it," he said, voice quiet but sure. "But I won't be anyone's token." Clara smiled. "We wouldn't ask you to be." Victor stepped back. The room wasn't his anymore. Power had shifted not through votes or board decisions, but through truth, through undeniable talent, through a boy who fixed what others couldn't, and a man who'd once been thrown away. By the following morning, news of the incident had already begun to ripple across the industry. What started as a short clip on a junior engineer's social feed, a muddy-booted teen fixing a multi-million-dollar machine, while top-level staff watched in disbelief, was now being reposted by automation blogs, STEM education forums, and even a few national business outlets. The headlines varied: teen solves problem that baffled senior engineers, farm kid restores $6 million machine. In front of CEO, remember the name Eli Carter. Inside Vanguard Tech, something far more profound was happening. The morning shift arrived to find the production line running smoother than it had in months. Supervisors stopped using clipped tones and barked orders less frequently. People who had barely nodded at each other in hallways now paused to ask, "Did you see it? That kid Eli, did you see what he did?" And in the cafeteria, the corner table once occupied by senior engineers became unusually quiet. No jeers, no dismissive laughter. Just coffee going cold as they scrolled through replays of yesterday's moment, trying to make sense of how it had all changed so quickly. Eli, still just 14 and barely tall enough to reach the top of the workbench without a step stool, had been invited back to sit with the systems optimization team. Clara had arranged it herself, and when she greeted him in the morning with "ready to teach us a thing or two," nobody laughed. But it wasn't just Eli's presence that was causing unrest. Gregory Carter had returned. He wasn't wearing a badge. He didn't need one. Word had spread faster than Victor could manage. Gregory's name meant something. The kind of name people whispered in training rooms and cited during design meetings as a reference point. Some had learned engineering off the documentation he wrote 15 years ago. Others remembered how abruptly he disappeared after an accident, a company restructure, and a board that made no room for healing or second chances. Now the man they'd all heard about stood again in Vanguard's halls. Not with a resume, not asking for anything, just standing beside his son. In the executive offices on the fourth floor, Victor Langston sat at his desk, gripping a printed report from HR. He read it again and again, as if the ink might rearrange into something he liked better. Clara Rhodes had formally submitted a request to bring both Eli and Gregory on board. Eli as a youth apprentice under a STEM initiative, and Gregory as a strategic consultant for diagnostics and legacy systems. Victor had tried to block it, but the board overruled him. The reason: performance metrics. Since the production line's restart, not only had system output increased by 14%, but power draw had decreased by 11%. Eli's adjustment had corrected not just the startup failure, but a series of cascading inefficiencies no one had even noticed. The cost savings were already measurable. The board wasn't going to ignore results. Victor stared out the window, jaw tight. He could see the factory floor from his office. Down below, Gregory was leaning over a table, with a group of engineers talking through control logic while Eli marked up the diagram beside him. They looked like they belonged, and that infuriated him. Later that day, in a quiet hallway off the main floor, Victor finally confronted Gregory. "You came back for a victory lap," Victor said, his voice low but sharp. "To humiliate me." Gregory turned, calm as ever. "No, I came back because my son deserves to walk through these doors with his head held high." Victor sneered. "You never could accept how this industry works. Rules, expectations, hierarchies." Gregory's expression didn't change. "I accepted them. I just refused to let them define my worth. And now so has Eli." Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think this changes anything? He's a kid. He got lucky." Gregory chuckled, once quiet but powerful. "You're scared of him. That's why you're angry. Because you know the old way, your way is fading. And it's not luck when someone does in 20 minutes what your experts couldn't do in 2 weeks." Victor's fist curled at his side, then loosened. He turned and walked away without another word. Downstairs, something else was stirring. During an impromptu meeting that afternoon, Clara addressed the entire systems team. "I want to be clear," she said, "we've witnessed something special. But this isn't just about one fix. It's about how we work moving forward. If you have ideas, no matter your title, bring them. And if you think someone doesn't belong here because of their age or background, this might not be the place for you anymore." Several engineers nodded. A few shifted uncomfortably. Eli sat quietly through the meeting, taking notes, unsure if he should raise his hand. But after it ended, Clara walked straight to him. "I meant what I said," she told him. "If you want to present ideas, I'll make sure they're heard. Starting with that sensor redesign you mentioned this morning." Eli blinked. You actually want to try it?" "Absolutely," she said. "You're not here because of your father. You're here because you earned it." Back home, Gregory and Eli sat on their porch that night, listening to cicadas and the distant sound of tractors from neighboring farms. Gregory turned toward his son. "I was afraid to let you see that place. I didn't want you to feel what I felt when I walked away from it." Eli looked down at his hand. "But I felt it anyway, and I fixed it." Gregory smiled. "You did more than that, Eli. You opened a door for all the kids like you who never get a chance to walk through it." And for the first time in years, the factory lights in the distance no longer looked cold to Gregory Carter. They looked like something new. The following weeks at Vanguard Tech didn't just mark the return of functioning machinery, they marked a transformation in spirit. The old ways built on hierarchy and unspoken biases began to crack. And the light seeping through those cracks carried the names of Eli and Gregory Carter. It started with a change in tone. Supervisors who once barked orders began to ask for input. Maintenance crews and support staff, long treated as invisible, were consulted for their on-the-ground observations. One technician even laughed aloud in the break room. "Feels like they finally realized we have eyes too." But the most visible symbol of change remained Eli, walking confidently across the floor, still in those same worn boots, now followed by engineers scribbling down his every insight. Eli was officially accepted into the Young Innovators Engineering Fellowship, a joint program Vanguard hadn't taken seriously until Clara Rhodes made it personal. We ignored the soil that genius can grow, and she told the board, and that won't happen again on my watch. Gregory, meanwhile, was no longer a ghost of the past. He had an office, though he rarely used it, and a seat at every high-level planning meeting. Younger employees from every department filtered into his quiet workspace, daily bringing questions, designs, or just a desire to listen. And Gregory listened. He never boasted, never reminded them of who he had been. He simply guided, corrected gently, and always pointed credit back to the team. But at the top of the chain, the pressure on Victor Langston reached a boiling point. His authority had already eroded. Public support for the Carters had gone viral. Employees whispered openly about Victor's days being numbered. And then came the final blow, a quiet, unanimous vote from the board. On a Monday morning without ceremony, Victor was removed as CEO. There was no farewell party, no photo montage, just a terse email sent from HR followed by a silence most found refreshing. In his place, Clara Rhodes was appointed interim CEO. Her first order of business was to sign off on 3 new initiatives, a merit-based mentorship program across all departments, a quarterly review panel including representatives from every level of the company, and a new name for the innovation wing, the Carter Lab for Ethical Engineering. The plant celebrated with the kind of energy not seen in decades. Local news stations rolled cameras through the assembly line. Eli gave a tour to a group of rural high school students, showing them how machines communicate if you just know how to listen. He spoke gently but with clarity beyond his years. Machines don't judge you by your clothes or your background, he told them. They only care that you respect how they're built. One girl, maybe 12, raised her hand and asked, "Do you think someone like me could do this?" Eli didn't hesitate. "Yes, someone like you is exactly who this industry needs." That answer was clipped, shared, and quoted across social media. Parents, teachers, and industry leaders began referring to the Eli effect, a shift in how talent was seen, especially in communities that had been overlooked for too long. And Gregory, he never chased the spotlight. When reporters asked for interviews, he declined more often than not. But he agreed to want to sit down with a quiet local paper that had once reported his injury and exit from the industry. The journalist, nervous and young, asked, "What does it feel like to come back after all this time?" Gregory looked out the window, then replied, "I'm not back for me. I'm here because the boy who carries my name proved something I couldn't. He fixed a machine, but more than that, he fixed a system that was broken long before the gears stopped turning." The article went viral. Months passed. The Carter name was no longer whispered, it was spoken with reverence. And not just at Vanguard. Tech schools began referencing Eli's sensor rewire as a case study. Engineering firms adopted Gregory's listen-first diagnostic approach. National education conferences booked both father and son for keynote sessions. Not once did they ask for payment. They only requested scholarships be set aside for rural youth and children of factory workers. One day, while walking the floor, Eli stopped beside the same control panel where everything had begun. A young employee named Marcus, fresh out of community college, was struggling with a sensor alignment. Eli crouched down beside him, examined the board, and gave a small smile. "Try flipping those two," he said, pointing. "Polarities reversed." Marcus blinked, then did as told. The screen lit up green. Eli patted his shoulder. "Happens to the best of us." Across the room, Gregory watched. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded to himself, heart full. That evening, as the sun lowered behind the smokestacks, Gregory and Eli stood by the loading dock, arms folded. "You ever think it would end up like this?" Eli asked quietly. "No," Gregory admitted, "but I always hoped the world would catch up with the truth." What truth? That brilliance doesn't come with a dress code, or a degree, or a pedigree. It just needs room to grow. They stood in silence after that. But in their silence there was peace, because the old ways had finally given way to something better, not just a repaired machine, but a factory in a world that now listened. Sometimes all it takes is a single moment, a quiet decision in the face of public doubt, to shift an entire system. Eli Carter didn't storm into Vanguard Tech to prove a point. He wasn't chasing a spotlight or trying to embarrass anyone. He simply did what he knew because someone had taught him with patience, care, and respect. That's the heart of this story. Not just about genius, but about unseen brilliance and the courage to show up anyway. For Gregory Carter, the journey was long. Wounds from years of exclusion ran deep. But watching his son rewrite that story on the very floor that once erased his own name was the kind of healing that few get to witness in their lifetime. And it reminds us that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It arrives not in thunder, but in the steady click of a rebooted machine and the applause that follows a long silence. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had your skills questioned because of your age, background, or appearance, remember Eli, remember Gregory, and remember that truth doesn't need permission to rise. It just needs a moment to be seen. So next time you're in a room full of doubt, stand steady. Hold your ground. And if you've got mud on your boots, even better, walk proud. If this story moved, you hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories like this one. And in the comments, tell me who was the person in your life who first believed in your potential. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never underestimate quiet courage.